The Christian in Complete Armor by William Gurnall. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 18. Chapter 1. Prayer's usefulness and necessity for the saint's defense in his warfare shown, and one reason given of the point. We begin with the first, the duty in general, together with the connection it hath with the whole preceding discourse of the armor, implied in the principle, praying. That is, furnish yourself with the armor of God, and join prayer to all these graces for your defense against your spiritual enemies. Section 1. Prayer is a necessary duty to be performed by the Christian and used with all other means in his spiritual warfare. This is the silver trumpet, by the sound of which he is to alarm heaven and call on God to his succor. Numbers chapter 10, verse 35. The saint's enemies will not fall till God rises, and God stays to be raised by his prayers. Psalms 68, verse 1. Let God arise and let his enemies be scattered. Prayer is a duty and means to be made use of in all our affairs. What bread and salt are to the table, prayer is to the Christian in all his undertakings, enjoyments, and temptations. Whatever our meal is, bread and salt are set on the board, and whatever our condition is, prayer must not be forgotten. As we dip all our morsels in salt and eat them with bread, so we are to exercise every grace, season every enjoyment, mingle every duty, and oppose every temptation with prayer. It hath been the constant practice of the saints in all their dangers and straits, whether from sin, devils, or men, to betake themselves to the throne of grace and draw a line of prayer about them, accounting this the only safe posture to stand in for their defense. When God called Abraham from Haran into a straight country, where he wandered from place to place amongst strangers, he could not but have him in some suspicion, and this created many dangers to this holy man from the kings round about. Now observe what course Abraham takes for his defense. You shall find in his removals the memorable thing recorded of him is that he erected an altar and called upon the name of the Lord. Genesis 12, verse 7 and 8, Genesis 13, verse 3 and 4. This was the breastplate he raised and entrenched himself in, when he had once by prayer cast himself into the arms of God for protection. Then he made account that he was in his castle. But what need Abraham put himself so often to this trouble? Had he not the security of God's promise when he set forth, that God would bless them that blessed him, and curse them that cursed him? And had he not faith to believe God would perform what he promised? Both. But neither God's promise nor Abraham's faith gave any license to supersede his duty of prayer. The promise is given as a ground of faith, and faith as an encouraging help in prayer, but neither intended to discharge us of our duty and save us the labor of that work. And what Abraham did, the same have all the saints ever done. The great spoils which they ever got from their enemies was in the field of prayer. If Moses sends Joshua into the valley against Amalek, himself will be on the mount to storm heaven by prayer, while he is engaged in fight. With the enemy below, and the victory, it is plain, was not got by Joshua's sword so much as Moses' prayer. Jehoshaphat, when he had near 1,000,000 of men mustered for this field besides his garrisons, yet we find him praying as earnestly as if he had not had a man. We know not what to do, but our eyes are upon thee. 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 12. Now if these worthies, when they had but flesh and blood, men like ourselves to contest with, did yet fetch in their help from heaven, and make such use of prayer, and that when other helps were not wanting, lest they should be found under the neglect of an indispensable duty and prevalence means in order to their defense, how much more doth it behoove the Christian, both in point of duty and prudence, to take the same course in his spiritual war against principalities and powers. For the saints' graces, when best trained and exercised, are without prayer far less able to stand against Satan than they, with their military preparation, were to repel the force of men like themselves. Watch and pray, saith our Savior, lest you enter into temptation. Matthew 26:41. They, not keeping this pass, gave the enemy Satan a fair occasion to come in with them, for we see, not taking Christ's counsel, they were all, though holy men, shamefully foiled. Most of them shifted for themselves by a cowardly flight while they left their Lord in his enemies' hands, and he that thought to show more courage than his fellows at last came off with deeper guilt and shame than them all by denying his master, who was even then owing him in the face of death, yea, his Father's wrath. And it is observable that as they were led into temptation through their neglect of prayer, so they were reduced and led out of it again by Christ's prayer, which he mercifully laid in beforehand for them. Luke 22:32. I have prayed for thee that thy faith fail not, but that which above all commends his duty to us is Christ's own practice, who, besides his constant exercise in it, did upon any great undertaking wherein he was to meet opposition from Satan and his instruments, much more abound in it. At his baptism, being now to enter the stage of his public ministry and to make his way thereunto through the furious assaults of Satan, with whom he was to grapple, as it were, hand to hand after his 40 days' solitude, we find him in prayer. Luke chapter 3, verse 21, which prayer had a present answer, heaven opening, and the Spirit descending upon him with his voice, saying, Thou art my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Verse 22. And now Christ marches forth undauntedly to meet his enemy, who waited for him in the wilderness. Again, when he intended to commission his apostles and send them forth to preach the gospel, which he knew would bring the lion mad out of his den, also the world's wrath upon those his messengers, he first directs them to pray. Matthew chapter 9, verse 38. And then spends the whole night himself in the same work. Luke 6:12. But, above all, when he was to fight his last battle with the prince of this world, and conflict with the wrath of his Father, now armed against him, and ready to be poured upon him for man's sin, whose cause he was espoused, on the success of which depended the saving or losing his mediaery kingdom, oh, how then did he bestir himself in prayer. It is said, he prayed more earnestly, as a wrestler that strains every vein in his body, so he put forth his whole might, with strong cries and tears to him that was able to save him from death. Hebrews 5:7. And was heard so that he won the field, though he was himself slain upon the place, the spoils of which glorious victory believers now divide, and shall enjoy to all eternity. And what is the end of all this but to show us the necessity and prevalence of prayer? Without this we cannot gain a victory, though we have our armor, but this with that will make us conquerors over all. Section 2. Now we proceed to show why prayer is so necessary a means, with our other armor, for our defense. The first reason is taken from the coordination of this duty with all other means for the Christian's defense, and that by divine appointment. He that bids us take the girdle of truth, breastplate of righteousness, etc., commands